The idea of equal justice is not playing out here. And so that's a real concern to all Americans. So as a policymaker, elected officials, we want to make sure it's equal justice for all. We want to look at it as weaponization. Now, you're with CNN, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about this even further, because when somebody weaponizes government and they actually get removed from government, let's take Andrew McCabe, okay, former deputy.
But this is a different case.
Let me answer the question.
This is a different set of circumstances, right? I mean, the former president is accused of misleading law enforcement, of a conspiracy of obstructing justice. That's a different set of facts. Are you prepared to defend him as the former president, and what other actions will the House take in the House Judiciary Committee in terms of funding?
Are you prepared to defend your network, CNN? I'm answering your question. You could ask me any question you want, but I'm entitled to answer the question, okay? You can't put words in my mouth. Even though your network can hire Andrew McCabe, who was fired from the FBI for leaking classified documents. Did you remove him from your network? No, you continue to put him on to give judgment against President
Mr.
Trump.
Speaker.
You also hire Clapper. Clapper has come out publicly.
Mr. Speaker,
and
what steps is the House going to take in terms of, is there any effort to defund the FBI, any effort to defund the Department of Justice after what you've seen over the last several days?
So your network hires Clapper, who literally lied to the American public, one of 51 other individuals that had briefings and used it politically to tell the American public that a laptop was Russia collusion, even though it had all this information about the Biden administration. Are you prepared to get rid of those people from your network? Because my concern as a policymaker is that when you weaponize government and now you're weaponizing networks, that is wrong. So we will take all of our power to make sure that the legal system in America gets the blinders back on and people are treated fairly. I have a real problem that your network actually pays people who did classified information and then lied to the American public to try to influence a presidential election, and then you put them on your network to give an opinion about a president. And I'm answering your
But you're not answering
very clearly, because what your network has
do.
done has weaponized at the same time. I think equal justice is important for all.
You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm not sure why we're debating this issue again. We just spent a very heated hearing last week on this issue, and here we go again. Once again, there are many things that this committee could be doing, like taking on sensible gun reforms to stop the scourge of gun violence that's killing our kids, but that is not what this majority is choosing to do. Instead, we're finding a way to talk about immigration, a subject outside of this committee's jurisdiction, and I say that as the ranking member of the Immigration Subcommittee of the Judiciary Committee. And we're not talking about how important immigration is to this country, how important immigrants are to our country, the many ways in which immigrants enrich our country. We're not talking even about how to support immigrant kids in school, which is such an important topic for us to be taking on. Instead, there is this continuing divisive rhetoric using words that we have asked politely not to be used, words that are insulting to immigrants, generations of immigrants across our country. But let me be clear once again. Border numbers are down over 60% from their peak. The headline in Politico is that this is the migrant crisis that still has not arrived. If my colleagues across the aisle were serious about addressing immigration, I welcome that effort. My Democratic colleagues and I have put forward legislation that would fix the immigration system and would provide fair, secure, humane ways to seek safety while strengthening border security, something that the American public, by the way, broadly supports. But here's the thing. It is just clear that my colleagues are not interested in fixing immigration. This entire proceeding is a distraction from the fact that my colleagues do not have meaningful solutions on education, the very topic of this committee. Why else do my colleagues take every opportunity with elementary and secondary school legislation to politicize and harm public schools, talking about banning books, whitewashing history, keeping trans kids from playing sports. If my colleagues spent half the time that they've invested in politicizing classrooms, maybe schools would be fully funded. Maybe we could help deliver an education to the low-income students who depend on Title I, who have the most to gain from education investments. Maybe we would be investing in the priorities that parents have identified, like addressing kids' mental health or providing school meals and universal pre-K. Schools are struggling across the board between improving learning outcomes, recovering from learning loss related to COVID, and the educator shortage. President Biden proposed raising the bar by increasing Title I by $2.2 billion and fully funding the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. Since then, unfortunately, my colleagues across the aisle have proposed cutting $7 billion to those same programs, the equivalent of removing 108,000 educators from schools serving both low-income students and students with disabilities. I once again would respectfully ask my colleagues across the aisle to stop using words like invasion. They are not helpful to...
Mr. Chairman, Ms. Asa, Republicans have constantly falsely accused Secretary Mayorkas of being derelict in his duty to secure the border, even though, as I said in my opening statement, border encounters have dropped sharply since the Biden administration terminated Title 42 last month. Republicans don't like the Biden administration is returning to a more orderly, humane border and immigration policy after the cruelty and dysfunction of the Trump administration, and they can't stand that these policies have been effective. So we are seeing this political theater play out with the Republican leadership trying desperately to appease its members. My Republican colleagues seem to be particularly upset about the Biden administration allowing people to present themselves at port of entry to seek asylum as provided under the law, just as every other administration had prior to this one. Actually, there seems to be some revisionist history going on because even President Trump's Secretary of Homeland Security, Kirstjen Nielsen, Mr. Wolf's former boss, acknowledged, in fact, encouraged migrants to come to ports of entry for processing, saying, and I quote, "So if a migrant comes to a port of entry, they haven't broken any laws." This is exactly why we tried to encourage the migrants to go to a port of entry. The Biden administration is being sued to force it to do more to restore access to asylum after the last administrations effectively cut it off. Now, Ms. Asa, since you are an immigration attorney with vast experience and expertise in this field, I want to talk with you and set the record straight. Claiming asylum at a port of entry is lawful, correct?
Absolutely.
Claiming asylum after being encountered by Border Patrol is lawful too, correct?
Absolutely, yes.
Paroling migrants is lawful and within the authority of the Secretary of Homeland Security, correct?
Yes, sir.
No administration has ever detained everyone encountered at the border, isn't that right?
That is right.
And that includes the Trump administration, correct?
Absolutely.
So Title 42 caused terrible harm to asylum seekers, which you saw firsthand on your visits to the border. Title 42 was also detrimental to border security, isn't that right?
Absolutely.
Please explain that to the committee.
As I mentioned in my testimony, Title 42 encouraged repeat entries. It did not have immigration consequences. It also pushed populations that used to go and seek asylum at ports of entry to end up having to cross between ports of entry because not just for weeks, but for months and months and years, there was no way to actually cross the border. The change in numbers we've seen, I believe, is a confirmation of what an absolute disaster Title 42 was from so many ways. Asylum seekers that we met at the border were trying to use the CBP One app. And how that works, for those of you who haven't seen it, is people provide information that the government receives and actually reviews in advance. One of our concerns about the CBP One app is that it could be used to actually meter and limit the number of asylum seekers allowed to legally seek asylum. In addition, I would say that, we're also concerned about asylum seekers who are trying to approach ports of entry who are not being allowed to do so now, either because of CBP or Mexican government authorities not letting them do so.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, I'd like to include in the record a GAO decision